Hello, everybody. I'm Ramon Mejia from the LitRPG podcast. This is episode something. I can't remember the number because I'm not at home. I'm actually out on the road at a writers' convention, Superstars writers' convention in Colorado. This is actually the view from my room. It's very snowy, very cold, which is a little bit of a change for a Southern California boy, but still an enjoyable conference. Having a chance to meet and to hang out with some LitRPG authors here, plus a lot of great information for writers in general. But that's part of the news section. So this week, though, we have 6 new reviews for you folks at home to enjoy and to hear from us. And that includes actually a combination of both the reviews from Ian Mitchell, our correspondent, and also myself. We're actually doubled up on everything. So I'm actually going to be reviewing them a little bit differently just because of the way that the podcast is set up this week, because I don't have a computer. I'm doing all of this from my phone, which means that the audio is not going to be amazing. The video is going to be a little different, so it'll look and feel a little bit different than normal, but hopefully we'll get through it all. And I'm also reading from a notepad today instead of a computer. So 6 new reviews for you folks, and again, I'll just be going through them a little later. But first, we have some LitRPG news for you folks. Let's see if I can find that. There we go, news. Our news section written down. Actually, the author of the Gods Game book #1 has done a complete rewrite and relaunch of the book under the title Free Agent Chronicles of Myland. So he's just kind of doing a relaunch, a full re-edit, reintroduction, apparently, according to his information to us of the podcast. He de-emphasized some of the game stuff, emphasized more character progression, story stuff, which you may or may not like. If you've read God Game Book 1, that may be a change for you. So there you go. The author did ask us to let you know about it in case you wanted to pick it up. It's again under the name now, Free Agent Chronicles of Myland, and it was originally God's Game book #1. So there we go. In other LitRPG news, we have books 1 through 3 in the Underworld series. We're actually reviewing book 4 in the podcast today. But books 1 through 3 are on sale. So if you haven't read the series, it's by Paul's Thorn. Great series. Like genuinely one of those series where I can just jump into it and enjoy it. And I know the game mechanics are really solid. And I know this RPG progression is going to be there. So I don't have to worry about none of that. I can just kind of enjoy the action adventure. And it's done by one of an author I really enjoy, all of his work basically. So books 1 through 3 are on sale until February the 10th for 99 cents. So definitely go check them out. And the last little bit of LitRPG news is Superstars writing convention. I already mentioned a little bit about that. I'm hopefully going to be popping in some pictures and some photos of some of the LitRPG authors that I've had a chance to hang out with a little bit, and some of the panels that they've done, including Dakota Crowd, who did an amazing panel about how to know when it's time to go full-time, and some like a Q&A questions from like legitimate authors who are like on the fence about making that step. And there's some great information that he did there, so really great stuff here at the conference. Also, James Hunter is doing this like great 3-part presentation about getting to understand Amazon, and it's been really informative. Some of that I already kind of knew, but other like little bits and points have been super interesting. So if you are at the convention, definitely go check that out. It's one of the best presentations, but also I know that James Hunter has also been doing a panel later in the evening, just helping people with their blurbs for their books when they publish them. So it's like been a super interesting and helpful kind of convention. So there you go, plus the views not bad from the hotel. So that's it for LitRPG news. On to stuff that has come out recently that I haven't had a chance to read. But that includes A Rare Online, Island of Redemption, The Crafter, book #2, Trench Warfare, then Dark Academy, Transformation, book #4, The Bad Guys, book #3, Tales of a Northblood Winter's Breath, Death's Mantle, book #2, and Orc Spawn Initiation. So those are some new releases that I was able to find from my phone. So if I missed your stuff, sorry. In new audiobooks, just one. Thankfully this week, Apocalypse Gates, book #5, Downtime and Death. So always enjoy Dana Schoenhofen's stuff, and the audiobooks that are produced, really nice things. But again, FYI, there is sexual content in those novels. And even if some of it's feedback, most of it's still action, adventure, RPG stuff. So just put the heads up if you're thinking of getting into that series. Okay, on to the actual reviews. And again, I'm actually going to be skipping the upcoming LitRPG list that I normally have, just because it was too big of a hassle to try to write and search through from my phone. Again, I don't have a computer. I should really invest in a decent laptop to do podcasts on the road. So I'm just going to go actually into the reviews, and it's going to actually be a combination of Ian's picks of the week and my own reviews on top of that, just because I didn't feel like making extra videos. So I'm actually going to be reading off Ian's reviews of each novel, and then if I happen to have read and reviewed the same thing, I'll be adding my own commentary as we go along. His first review for this week is Light, Buryoku, book number 2 by Aaron Oster, and Ian says, I enjoyed book number 2. There are several threads that were woven together well, a good continuation. The color belt system is interesting. I like Roy's abilities. It does seem like the cultivators run out of essence quickly. Having read a lot of wuxia recently, as well as Western cultivation stories, Buryoku fits well. Thanks to the author for some good story crafting and interesting world to experience. For an action series, I found it a smooth ride, and it gives it a score of 8.3 out of 10. So there we go. I haven't read that one, so no commentary for me. His second review of the week is The Crafter's Dilemma, a dungeon core novel, dungeon crafting book number 3, by Jonathan Brooks. I've read plenty of Jonathan Brooks stuff. He's always a really good writer, and it was always fun to me to see his progression in finding kind of his niche genre that he enjoys writing in, and his stories getting progressively better. He does a lot of dungeon core stories. But this is Ian's review of that novel. He says, I like the idea and the execution. My one issue is this setup isn't good for dialogue. It was an interesting story and advanced the plot. Overall, I liked it a bit less than some of Jonathan Brooks' dungeon core stories. Good reading. Anyways, I enjoyed it. Some interesting magical tech. Then he gives it a score of 7.8 out of 10. Okay, next one is one that both Ian and I reviewed this week. It is for Season 1, a survival LitRPG battle royale. The series title is Bloodgames, book number 1 by Christian J. Gillian, maybe. Okay, Ian's review is, I like adventures where there is a sense of danger. At least it wasn't a there can be only one kind of thing. Decent leveling, classes and skills, fairly simple set, with a buy anything marketplace. A lot of stuff crammed in here. Some minimal crafting. I'm curious where it goes from here. Probably the most disturbing bit were some memory scenes. I enjoyed the read, and Ian gives it a 7.9 out of 10. Now, my review is a little bit different, but oddly enough, our scores were about the same. I actually give the novel a 7.6 out of 10, and I'll describe why mine's a little bit less. Fairly straightforward survival murder game with RPG mechanics. RPG stuff is fairly standard. Stats, skills, abilities that can be increased as the characters level. There is a bit of click button crafting, but the emphasis is on the physical and social conflicts. As 1,000 people vie for survival, resources, food, weapons, and items until only 10 remain. There are groups that go whole hog player killing, and others that want to work to create groups to wait things out while crafting and collecting resources. There is good action, nice character development through gradually revealed memories. There's also a kind of specific dark humor that didn't quite land for me, but it might work for you. It's just one of those things with humor. It's like it either lands with you or it doesn't. Didn't quite work for me. And some okay game stuff. So for me, it gets a score of 7.6 out of 10, and most of that is just because of I wish the crafting would have been better, to be honest. A little more in depth. It's very much like literally you have a resource, click a button in the UI interface, and there you go, there's your thing. So that was a little bit of disappointment. The game mechanics stuff, again, is fairly standard, so that lowers it for me because I didn't see anything really innovative. The battle royale stuff is, again, very faithful to that kind of game system. And so it's very much murder hobo for a lot of the story, but there is some mid and late story development where you get a good character from the memory, the revealed and recovered memories from the main character. And it is a little dark, like Ian said. So just beware. So for me, though, it gets a score of 7.6 out of 10. Next is Underworld, Proving Grounds, a LitRPG series by Apollo's Thorn. Ian's review is, this was a really fast read for me. A good chunk of the book has Elorians spending time with different members of the group. Various advances are showcased as well as people getting their master levels. There wasn't a lot of combat, but I had a good time regardless. The writing was tight. I like the game system in this dungeon / all the time series. I'm not sure what that means. He gives it a score of 8.2 out of 10. And again, our reviews for this are fairly similar. My review gives it a score of 7.7 out of 10. Again, that's a good score for me. That's actually really good in general. And my review says, the fourth book in the Underworld series does not disappoint. Lots of good fights and RPG progression for not just the main character, but the secondary characters as they master their skills and get their own transformations. So we both kind of know that it's not just the main character that's showing a lot of good RPG progression, but also the secondary characters, like his girlfriend and the various group members. So it's nice to see like a variety of RPG progressions with their specific skill sets. I'll admit that the story didn't quite resolve like I thought it would, which isn't necessarily bad. It did just take a different path. But it does progress in a way that lets the series continue, which I'm happy about. Even if it means a loss of base building. And I'm really trying not to be spoiler here for you guys. But like this series as in general been really, really good. I've enjoyed every single book in the series. There's always good action adventure. The author has tried to bring different kinds of game mechanics as the series has progressed. And I think in this particular instance, he just kind of ran out of stuff for the base building. And so he's shifting the story away from that. Just because it is kind of a dead-end storytelling system, as you're kind of trapped in a location. And part of what the series' big plotline is escaping from this massive underworld with magical creatures of varying power levels, and kind of forcing the characters to progress so that they can live and survive as they get progressively deeper in this underground magical kind of universe. And so keeping them in a location where they're doing base building was really kind of a dead-end story path. So I'm definitely kind of glad that it's going to be shifting away from that a little bit. I am sad that, of course, you're losing game mechanics, but hopefully the story develops in interesting other ways. So there we go. And for me, again, that was a 7.7 out of 10 for Underworld, Proving Grounds, a LitRPG series by Paulo Thorn. Okay, next is Infernal Bones, Elemental Dungeon, book number 2 by Jonathan Schmidt. Ian's review. I could have skipped the first 25% of the book and not missed much. I considered putting it down at that point. I'm glad that I didn't. The rest was interesting and exciting. Life in the dungeon town and inside the bone dungeon. Demons attacking the countryside. A race to save the town and the dungeon. Fairly large conflicts and combat. The latter part of the book matched up with my experience of the first book. A dark dungeon core with a good fairy trying to do the right thing. A great finish. And don't forget rule number 1. I lowered my score / rating largely due to the slow start. And he gives it a score of 7.6 out of 10. Now, actually, I both, this is probably the closest we've gotten in a long time for a review score. I actually give it a 7.5 out of 10. So he gave it a 7.6. I give it a 7.5. Our reasons are actually slightly different, though. Here's my review of the same novel. Good story with the dungeon core stuff from book 1. There are new monsters and new characters that keep things interesting and fresh. Good action adventure, good fun dialogue between the main adventuring group and the dungeon. Very crunchy system. Minor things for me. The last 25% of the story felt forced. It was still entertaining, but the story shoves in a conflict that shifts things down an underdeveloped story path with some underdescribed power progression. What I mean by that essentially is that there's an event that happens in about the last quarter of the novel that kind of feels a little out of left field. I understand as a storyteller that it's this moment of turning on the story where it changes the way the story is told and things are progressing in a different way. But it felt a little forced because it wasn't really set up for this particular character and what happens. And what it ends up doing is kind of breaking this more slice of life storytelling and making some of the characters disappear. And when they come back, everybody's progressed in power quite a few levels with new abilities, new skills, new weapons, etc. And all that stuff is not described for those characters in the story. Like they just disappear and come back and, oh, look, they're more powerful. And for me, I'm like, oh, that sort of is, I didn't enjoy that part. Because up until that point, all their character progression, their RPG progression, I should say, was very well detailed as they were dungeon diving. And that last little bit, just like, oh, that's slightly disappointing. I understand that the author would have had to have like added an extra 200 pages or something to the novel to describe each of those characters' kind of individual progressions as they left the main storyline and went on their own little adventures. So I get why the author did it, but it still was like, oh, they just come back a little power leveled and without like actual description. Like there are some summaries that they say in the story where like, oh, I was doing this and I was doing this, whatever the case is. It just like felt slightly less satisfying for me. In addition to that last quarter's storyline felt like, oh, it was always meant to be there, but it felt a little rushed in getting there at the last instant. And that's just a personal opinion. It wasn't unentertaining. I just didn't find it as entertaining as the first 75% because that's very much a detailed dungeon dive kind of thing going on. So there it is. So for me, it gets go score again 7.5 out of 10, which is kind of a middle of the road good score for me. Ian again gives a slightly better score at 7.6 out of 10. But again, he had issues with the first quarter. I had issues with the last quarter. And that's again review scores for Infernal Bones, Elemental Dungeon book number 2. Okay, last review for the podcast, and this one's strictly an Ian review. It is for Exceed System, The Gambler. And Ian's review says, I like the story. Some things felt a bit odd and forced, but at the same time I felt like I was back on a console playing Zelda 2 or one of the retro RPG JRPG games, with dialogue choices and scripted quests that chained together. So that really worked for me. The gambler system was a bit strange but different. I've read a lot of Wuxia and Gamelit, but I like seeing different variations. It felt silly and simplified, but I thought it made for a good story. This is a reincarnation into a game world one. Hero has been railroaded into being a top-tier power guy starting out at handed quest. His system AI, slime sidekick banter keeps going off while he's off doing quest. Less edgy and more suitable for a young adult and kids. I think I found a single typo in the whole book. So high marks overall. Might not be gritty enough for some, but I think it has appeal for those that played retro games. He gives it a score of 8.1 out of 10. So there you go. Again, that's another story I've read. And it doesn't really seem like a fit for something I'm interested in, so I'm definitely sticking with Ian's review here. We'll post it on the podcast when I get back to a real computer. But again, he gives it a score of 8.1 out of 10 for Exceed System, The Gambler. And that's it, folks. That's the whole show. We got reviews for you. We got news. We got recent releases, all on the road and recorded and edited from my phone because I don't have a laptop that's good enough to do that kind of stuff. So I'm just here doing it. So thank you very much for listening, for hanging out with me for the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia, and remember to read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.